Empire Total War is a game that focuses on 18th to 19th century warfare while also focusing on historical nations and battles with a Risk-style map. Empire was created in 2009 by the developers of Creative Assembly and is notoriously known for the early game being buggy, but later in the 2010s it was released as a definitive edition that came with the base game with bug fixes and all DLC. In Empire, you are able to choose from three separate game modes: the campaign, which focuses on the colonization of America, the French-Indian War, and the American Revolution, or you can go into a grand campaign, of which you can play as different countries, i.e. Britain, France, or Prussia. Lastly, you can play as American natives in the Warpath option, and from each of the game modes, there is a difficulty meter for both battles and the campaign itself. In all types of the game modes, you start out with things like gold, which can be used for upgrading buildings and buying soldiers, or an army or two, which can be used for battles which already have some soldiers to fight in. Spies, not all countries have them. Some do. These guys can be used to sabotage buildings, assassinate leaders, and basically just scout out an enemy force. And you also have buildings, which produces goods for trade, so you can get money for your income. Or some buildings are military, which means you can buy and produce soldiers to fight in armies. So let's start talking about those armies. So and the units. So in every single army, there are things called units. Units in this game are types of infantry, artillery, cavalry, and ships. The ships are for naval warfare. Let's start out with the infantry. The infantry are the most basic line units, something that you will want to have in your nation's army most of the time. They do most of the work, and with some infantry being different, like Minutemen or conscripts, not all are recommended for being an assaulting force. Some are recommended to be a sneaky force, or a defending force, or just a basic far away force, or a melee force. Now, regular line infantry that can shoot melee, uh, they're just called line infantry. They don't really have a special name. They can be used for both defensive and offensive purposes. Now, the sneaky type of infantry, which I mentioned before, are called light infantry. They are the ones who usually take shots from like trees or something like that from a very tactical position. If they are standing still, not firing, then they will disappear from the enemy eye. You cannot see them if you're the enemy. But if they are in your army and they are invisible to the enemy, you can still see them as they are in your army. You need to know where your units are, because if you don't, that's a problem. Now, light infantry are not the only types of infantry that can do that. If you ever played a Warpath game, which maybe you have if you played Empire from the very beginning, you would know that, or if you face them by playing a different nation like the USA, you would know that they can actually turn invisible. Most of the units can in the army, in a native's army, I might add. Since they do that, the native troops, it can be quite hard to figure out where they're going to go. Most of the time, they're most of the time going to charge your line straight on. So it's always good to bring a lot of infantrymen and mostly a lot of cannons, since they can do canister shot. But we'll get into the cannons later. Now, now, infantry that likes to stay behind and shoot from afar and not be that and be well hidden. There are also infantry that wants to be close up to the action. You know, get some melee kills. These are called, well, grenadiers, which if you know army groups like the British Grenadiers, you will know that that in Empire Total War, They are relatively smaller numbers, but if you use them right, they are great for melee. So, while your regular infantry are in a line battle, your grenadiers, if you use them right, can can put off a shot of bullets to the enemy, and then you can charge them straight in. They are also good for countercharging if the enemy is charging your lines. Use to, I guess, in some cases, let you pull your other forces back for some breathing room. Because if you don't, then morale collapse. And if the morale collapse, then that can be bad. Which, let's talk about the morale. The morale of your units are very important, as they are what keeps your infantry and other units up in battle. From your general, which we'll talk about later, as the battle goes on, your units will slowly lose and gain morale. Like Like, for some examples, if an enemy infantry unit gets routed by one of your units, their morale will go up for a bit. But if if an infantry unit routs one of your units, then that can be quite a problem, as then the rest of your units may actually lose morale as they see that they're losing the battle. The morale usually most of the time, other than the routing system, usually lasts or functions on how long your units have been in battle. So if your units have been fighting a destructive line formation battle for better part of the fight, then usually your units morale will be pretty low and they can be pretty prone to breaking. If your morale gets too low, then that'll mean that your infantry units or any other units will end up breaking. Now, they can be overrun or simply the of uh, an, a battalion of anything can lose too many soldiers, mostly infantry. They can lose too many, and they can end up retreating. Now, if you're lucky, and your units haven't shadowed, then your units will maybe stop retreating, and they will return to the battle. But if your units never recover, and they reach the end of the map, which usually has a red line over it, then your units will disappear from your roster, and then they will, and then they will never be able to be used again. Which the roster allows you to see what kind of units you have. Now, usually you'll know if one of your if one of your if one of your units are retreating, usually because they flash red. Now, now, let's talk about the general, because the general is actually pretty needed. Now, the general, it helps with keeping your morale for your units up. With It's always good to bring a general or maybe two, usually because generals have a big effect on the army. They allow morale to go up, and they are a pretty big part of fighting. Now, if a unit or the general dies, then that could be a pretty bad thing, because a unit's morale will plummet, or every single unit will plummet in your army, and that can be pretty bad, because that can cause your army to rout sooner. So it's always good to bring a backup general, just in case something like that happens. Now, after us talking about the very important system of morale in a battle, and also going pretty distinctly off of where I wanted to go, let's continue talking about our units. Next, we have the artillery. The artillery are really useful when it comes to bombarding the enemy if they are in a fort. Now, I say that because usually you can use artillery to to take down the walls of forts and march other units inside, usually light infantry. Or or if you just want to get some good devastating shots off infantry, then you can do that as well. It doesn't really matter how you use your artillery. Just make sure that you use them in a way that's actually pretty good. Now, let's talk about the different types of artillery. Just like infantry, they are different types. There's not a melee type and there's not a sneaky type, but they but there are different kinds of infantry. Now, there was rocket artillery, stationary artillery, horse artillery, regular artillery, and other types of artillery too, but I can't remember the names at the moment. Now, since you have a whole bunch of artillery and a whole bunch of line units, that's pretty good. But but if you are a big flanker, right? You want something speedy. You want something good. You're doing your artillery bombardments and you're doing your infantry charges, but that isn't enough. You see your line units breaking, and you see the enemy close to victory. Well, if you wanna get a good bit of charging off, then that's what the cavalry is for. Just like artillery and infantry, your cavalry are very important to the battle, mostly because they can help in a flanking situation. If you attack from the side or behind of an enemy line unit, then that'll be very useful as they will break easily. Now, now, and just like every other single unit in this game, they have different types. There are heavy cavalry, light cavalry, lancers, dragoons. Now, that's not as many as the other types of units, but it's still pretty useful. Now, the cavalry do have one one counter, and it's what the infantry can do. The infantry can do something called square formation. A square formation is very effective against cavalry. If they're using multiple squares, then doing an infantry battle that has cavalry charging at you 24/7 won't be pretty hard. Just do two squares on your flanks and you're pretty much good. Because you'll have the sides, straight, front of you, everywhere else pretty much protected in your flanks. So you won't really have to worry. That's the only real counter, except of bombarding a cavalry force with artillery. That's the only real counter to cavalry. Now, let's talk about warships. Or basically, let's just talk about sea battles entirely. You know, something that doesn't really be enjoyed much, just how slow they are and how painful they are. And I just want this battle to end now. Okay, so warships, for me, there's not really much to say. I say whatever Total War game comes out, war battles are not going to be fun. They're just going to be slow and depressing. But the warships do offer a lot of options, like frigates, ships of the lines, steamships. In certain countries, you can get special ships that usually account for DLC. Like the US can get the USS Constitution, a very famous ship still alive today, and still floats. And the British can get the HMS, uh, the HMS Victory, which I believe, yeah, yeah, it still exists. It still exists. Yep. Now, both comes in the form of DLC, and we'll talk about that later because a lot of units also have DLC, including a bit of the campaigns and stuff like that. Now, let's talk about the campaigns. Actually, let's talk about the DLC. Okay, first, the DLC it's it's kind of good, I'm guessing. Well, I mean, yeah, 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 it is kind of good. The DLC allows more units, uh, and it allows more units for certain countries, like the USA has a DLC which is called the Elite Units of America. It adds special units like the First of Maryland, and also the British have special units too, like the Royal Irish Regiment. But I don't know if that's really a special unit DLC unit. I don't really know. But anyways, since that's basically what the DLC is, just adding more units and more content to the game, let's actually talk about the campaign now. The campaign, as I mentioned earlier, that it focuses on the colonization and revolution of America. Now, you can go into the campaign selection and you are able to choose from 4 different time periods. These are the 4. You have the establishment of Jamestown in the 1600s. Then we have the French and Indian War, when the French built forts on a piece of land that both the French and British have claimed theirs. Then, after that, you transition into the American Revolution, where you start fighting on Bunker Hill, and for the final time period, you start in 1783, where America is fully independent. Now, each period has their own objectives. For Jamestown, you need to clear out native resistance. For the French and Indian War, you need to take out all French positions in both America and Canada. And also need to take New France and Quebec from the French. On the American Revolution, you need to get the 13 colonies off the British, starting at Boston, and also some other land policies. For the final period, you need to expand west as the newly founded America and start your own journey into legend. Now, for the other game modes, there's not really much to them. For the grand campaign, you take control of whatever country that's available and you just play as it. Usually, if you're in vanilla, then you can play from the 1700s, the beginning of the 1700s. For Warpath, you just play as Native Americans resisting the expanding America, which is kind of hard, but I never really played it before, so I don't really know. So, so since you have now heard of all this, you're probably thinking, alright, Zonical, this mod sounds, well not mod, but this game sounds fun. Is there anything we can maybe mod into the game? Well, I'm glad you asked. But then again, that's probably no. If we go to a website called ModDB, then we are able to choose different mods for Empire. There is also a site called Total War, but it also offers mods. Now, there is a mod that everyone recommends, no matter what. That is called Darth Mod, which adds to the base game and also fixes bugs, but does limit certain units, like Grenadiers, which I don't really like because I like my whole army being of Grenadiers, but that isn't really good. So that's basically it. That's the end of this review. Was it a good review? Heck no. Was it an okay review? Heck no. Was it a bad review? Of course not. Was it a terrible review? Of course it was. But that's pretty much it. Now, I did say in my almost 1 month ago apology video that I would make a Napoleon Total War review. But then again, I won't. Mostly because it's not really because I'm lazy. Okay, maybe I'm a little lazy. But it's pretty much just the same as Empire. There's nothing really to add to it, except it just focuses on the Napoleon Wars. But since I have finished this review, what games do you want me, what you want to see review next? Granted, it will take probably a year or two to actually make the video like this one here, but uh, you can believe. Now, I have two games in mind. It's Victoria 2 or Hearts of Iron 4. Which one would you want to see? But even if you want your, but even if you want me to review a game that you have that isn't one of the two, then put it in the comments. I may not make it or ever make it, but I will consider it. And give me some time. Remember, I'm only doing this YouTube thing by myself. I don't plan on having any help, and I plan on editing every single of my videos by myself. So please, it may take time to actually get the stuff done, especially for a 13-year-old. Now, this video is pretty much over for the 100th time. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you enjoyed, please like, comment, and subscribe. And I I promise I won't take as long as the next one. Just I won't take as long the next time a video. I'll make sure to maybe not procrastinate as much, but I will make sure to do it. Anyway, I will make sure to see you guys next time. Goodbye. A game that focuses on 18th to 19th century warfare while also focusing on historical nations and battles with a Risk-style map. Empire was created in 2009 by the developers of Creative Assembly and is notoriously known for the early game being buggy. But later in the 2010s, it was released as a definitive edition that came with the base game with bug fixes and all DLC.